If you imagine the entire story of us, all of it, the pyramids, the Roman Empire, your smartphone, as a single 24-hour movie, all of recorded history would flash by in just the last few seconds. We're here to watch the rest of that movie. This is the big one, the 6 million-year epic of how we became, well, us. 6.5 million years. Just try to wrap your head around that number. It's almost impossible. If all of written history is just a single page in a book, then our prehistoric journey is an entire library. And that vast, deep time library is where our story really begins. So that's the big question, right? How does a creature that spent its days swinging through trees end up building rocket ships? It's an incredible story, and it's not just about time. It's a story about facing one impossible challenge after another and coming up with brilliant, world-changing solutions. Okay, so our story starts with a crisis, a huge one. The world our earliest ancestors knew, the dense African forests, was literally disappearing. It was thinning out, replaced by these wide-open, dangerous grasslands, the savanna. Now, if you're a tree dweller, that's a nightmare scenario. The solution? It was one of the most radical moves in the history of life on Earth. And this quote from the legendary Richard Leakey just says it all. This is like the ultimate detective story. Scientists flock to places like Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania. People call it the cradle of humankind, searching for these tiny fossil clues, these little pieces of an ancient puzzle that help us figure out how this whole journey even started. Yeah, this definitely didn't happen overnight. It unfolded over millions and millions of years. I mean, as far back as 6.5 million years ago, you had hominins like Sahelanthropus who were kind of testing the waters, doing a bit of both. But fast forward to 3.2 million years ago, and we find these fossil footprints. They're just like ours. And think about it. Walking on 2 feet wasn't just about moving around. It was the thing that freed up our hands. Hands to carry things, to make things, and ultimately to change the entire planet. All right, so we're up on 2 feet. Problem solved? Not even close. The savanna is a seriously dangerous place, crawling with huge predators. Standing up was just step one. The next challenge was much more direct. How do you survive? How do you go from being on the menu to, well, reading the menu? Well, the answer was brain power. Plain and simple. On the left, you're looking at the skull of Homo habilis. That's handyman. On the right, Homo erectus. You don't need to be a scientist to see what's happening. The brain case is physically getting bigger, and that growth powered a massive leap in intelligence. It meant better tools, smarter strategies, and the kind of teamwork you need to make it out there. Now, I know what you're thinking. It's a rock, but this is so much more than a sharp rock. This hand axe is maybe one of the most important inventions ever. Why? Because it's the first tool made to a pattern, a design that someone held in their mind first and then created. It was like the original Swiss Army knife, and it was so good at its job that the design barely changed for over 1 million years. Incredible. And then came the next huge leap, taming a force of nature. Getting control of fire, that was a total game changer. Suddenly you have protection from predators, you have warmth to survive the cold, and you can cook your food, which unlocks way more energy for those growing brains of ours. The campfire wasn't just a kitchen, it was the first living room, a place to gather, share, and connect. So, with bigger brains, better tools, and fire at our command, the stage was set for something new. This time, the revolution wasn't just about physical survival. It was about ideas, about symbols, about who we are. This is the beginning of culture, and it's driven by our very own species, Homo sapiens. But here's a twist. As our species, Homo sapiens, started to show up, we weren't alone on the planet. Meet our closest and now extinct relatives, the Neanderthals. These guys were a whole other kind of human, perfectly built for the ice ages of Europe. They were incredible hunters and, get this, they buried their dead. That simple act suggests something huge, a capacity for symbolic thought, maybe even a belief in something more. This fact right here just blows my mind every time. For most of our time on Earth, there were multiple kinds of humans walking around. Think about that. And now, there's just us. We are literally the last humans standing. Why we made it and they didn't, that's still one of the biggest mysteries in science. And maybe, just maybe, this is part of the answer. This handprint, sprayed onto a cave wall thousands of years ago, is so powerful. It's not just a drawing of an animal to help with a hunt. It's a symbol. It's a person saying, I was here, I existed. This is the spark, the beginning of art, of abstract ideas, of wanting to leave a mark. And that new way of thinking just lit a fire under our creativity. The pace of invention, which had been pretty slow for millions of years, suddenly went into overdrive. You've got spear throwers that basically give a hunter a bionic arm, tiny little bone needles that let you sew fitted clothing, which is absolutely crucial for surviving an ice age. And then the bow and arrow, a total revolution, letting you hunt dangerous animals from a safe distance. We weren't just surviving anymore, we were innovating. So, armed with this amazing new toolkit of technology and ideas, our ancestors were finally ready for their biggest adventure yet, to step out of their home continent and make the entire planet their own. What was pushing them? What drove this incredible expansion? It was something very simple and very harsh. As hunter-gatherers, you're always living on the edge. This quote nails it. When the food ran out where you were, the choice was brutal: starve or move. And so they moved. I mean, just look at this map. This is one of the most epic journeys in the history of life, spreading out of Africa, generation after generation, following the herds and the seasons. They pushed along coastlines into Asia. They made the first ever sea crossings to Australia. They ventured into the frozen heart of Europe, and they just kept going. The last great frontier was the Americas, and to get there, our ancestors needed a little help from the planet itself. At the height of the last ice age, so much of the world's water was frozen in these gigantic glaciers that sea levels dropped like a stone. And that uncovered a brand new piece of land, a bridge connecting Asia to North America. And across that bridge, hunters followed their prey into a whole new world, becoming the first peoples of the Americas. For millions of years, we were defined by movement. But then, starting around 12,000 years ago, some of us found a solution that would stop the wandering and change absolutely everything about how we live. You have to remember, for 99% of our story, we were nomads. Then came agriculture. This was the biggest shift in human history, period. Instead of following our food, we figured out how to make it grow where we were. And that changed everything. You could finally settle down. You could produce more food than you needed, a surplus. And that surplus could support more people, which led to the first villages, the first towns, and eventually the whole world we live in today. So what did this new life look like? Well, welcome to Chronological. This is one of the world's very first towns. Thousands of people lived here, packed into these mud brick houses so tightly there were no streets. You got in and out through a ladder on your roof. They were farming, raising animals, and trading with people hundreds of miles away. This wasn't just a place to live. It was a blueprint for a completely new way of being human. And that brings us right to the end of our 6.5 million year story, and to the very beginning of another. You see, everything we just talked about, from learning to walk to settling the entire globe, all of that is technically prehistory. The invention of writing around 3000 BCE is the line in the sand. That's when we say history begins. Which really makes you wonder, right? If our ancestors did all of that without writing down a single word, what does that say about what we're capable of next?